The outline for this lecture is the good, the bad, and the ugly about the early African church during the 4th through mid-6th century AD. The good, Christianity was spreading near Central Africa. Evidence that Christianity had spread into Nubia is undeniable. This African frontier territory was south of Egypt and its Coptic Christian communities, and north of today's Sudan, and shared a border with Ethiopia in the southeast, where Christianity was the religion of the state. It was also adjacent to Theban desert Christian communities. Between 1931 and 1934, excavators discovered archaeological evidence of Christian influence in Nubia. Also, vast amounts of Christian inscriptions, declarations, pagan temples rededicated as churches, as well as Christian artifacts in royal tombs that date back to the 5th through 6th century AD. That was concurrent with the life of Augustine in northwest Africa. The bad. Invaders began persecuting both Donatists and Nicaeans in northwest Africa. For over 40 years, what we know to be priests, monks, and nuns from Augustine's monasteries thrived and were in great demand. Then in 429 AD, 3 months before Augustine's death, with the help of the Moors, a huge band of Germanic tribes called Vandals invaded Carthage and Numidia. These were key monastery locations. As Arians, Vandals rejected teachings about the triune nature of God, so both Donatists and Catholics, being Trinitarians, became the targets of Vandal persecution. By 434 AD, it became clear to Rome that Vandal presence and violence could not be stopped by force, so Rome withdrew its military and political presence from northwest Africa. For the next 100 years, northwest Africa was under Vandal rule, except they could not make a significant settlement further inland, due to being harassed by the indigenous Berbers. Enter the Berber king Masuna. He was the Romano-Moorish king in Mauritania. In 533 AD, his local chieftains and rulers joined forces with the Byzantine Emperor Justinian to put an end to the Vandal kingdom in Africa, as well as to other invading Berber tribes. The ugly. After 100 years of Vandal domination, Donatists and Nicaeans still maintained strong convictions about their differences. The indigenous Berbers already in Mauritania and Numidia survived the Vandal invasion and their 100-year occupation by reviving their old culture in some places. They were key to the survival of Donatist members. After the Vandalic War, the Byzantine Emperor Justinian intended to unify what was left of the Catholic Nicene Church in Africa with what remained of the Roman Empire by discouraging all divisive tendencies, including Donatism. But to the Donatists, who had survived the Vandals, as well as survived the Byzantine reconquest of old Roman North African territories, maintained their independent nature of African Christianity until the Arab conquest of northern Africa. This ugly led to a decline of Christianity in northwest Africa. The researcher Stuart Erskine describes early African Christians as independent, argumentative, intensely combative, and too ready to fight to the death with anyone who opposed their convictions. If this suggests that the faith convictions of African Christians were based on falsehoods, evidenced by their vanished communities, then such reasoning would also suggest that every Christian martyr held false beliefs, evidenced by their death. No, rather, both factions believed they were correct. The fact that the Byzantine Empire was more powerful and wealthier than the remaining Donatists in Africa. This doesn't mean their practice of Christianity was the correct one, and the indigenous Donatists' beliefs were false. Remember, Africa was the Donatists' homeland, not the Byzantines. Rule number 1, don't barge into someone's home and then tell them how to practice their faith. Since emerging from the underground and continuing for 250 years, instead of having the space to worship and surrender to the Holy Spirit as He grows, transforms, and matures their spiritual understanding. These Northwest Berber Christians lived in fear of outsiders attempting to snuff out their faith. And when it could not be snuffed out, the same outsiders convoluted Christianity with their secular political agenda and tried to force it upon Berber Christians. You better believe these Africans' Berber Christians were stubborn. Who could blame them? They were so convinced of their beliefs about Jesus' message and mission that on a micro level, not only would they resist being forced to convolute it with politics and power, but also on a macro level, they were willing to allow a regional-wide collapse of a convoluted version of Jesus' message and mission. In other words, they preferred to die with truth than to live with a lie. Hence, Psalms 116, verse 15. It reads, "Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of His faithful servants." More details can be found by clicking the link to the 11th and final video, as well as by purchasing the book Surveying Christianity's African Roots in the description below.